if you guys didn't guess it already, the mower's in the shop today. And as you saw from that previous video, it would start up, and then after a couple seconds it would just kind of stall out. So that could be one of several things, and I'll go over them real quickly. One, it could possibly be that you have something caught up in your fuel line or fuel filter. It could have to do with oil. On some or most machines nowadays, hopefully, have a safety oil level switch. So when your oil drops below a certain level, it will automatically cut out your engine and not allow it to start, or it will allow it to start, but it'll shut off shortly after. So it could be fuel line related, it could be your oil. It could have something to do with your air filter. If your air filter is extremely clogged up, maybe the engine's just getting enough air for it to start and then it chokes itself out because it doesn't have that air that it needs to run. Another possibility, which is pretty unlikely for the symptoms that we're experiencing here, is it could be something along the lines of your spark plug. Now, the reason why I don't really suspect that is because on my first pull it did fire right away, so I do suspect, or well, I am getting good spark. And as a precaution, I also did just pop that spark plug out to make sure that everything looked fine. Check the gap was fine, so everything was fine there. Another possibility along that spark plug line, you could have something shorting out on the actual wire that goes to your spark plug. So it could be something along those lines. And finally, also just make sure you have fresh fuel. It could be unlikely that it would produce the symptoms that we have based on bad fuel, but if you have bad fuel or old fuel, I think generally anything that's older than a month, you want to switch that out, but it's most likely your carburetor. Now in this machine, I've taken apart the carburetor about a week ago. I noticed a little bit of corrosion in there. I cleaned everything out the best I could, cleaned the needle, and I went outside to start it, and it was doing the same thing. So I suspect that somewhere in that carburetor there's just a piece of dirt, or the corrosion's just to the point where that the carburetor is pretty much garbage, which isn't terrible. It's just kind of unfortunate that I had to purchase a new one, which it really wasn't too bad. If you give me a second here, I'll tell you what it actually cost me. So to buy a new manufacturer-specific carburetor for this lawnmower was only $29. So. And also, while I was online ordering a new carburetor, I also ordered a new air filter. And the total of everything shipped to my door, including tax, was $36.97. I mean, so that's really not too bad. Now, if you were to take this to a mechanic shop, that bill could easily turn into $200, depending on what the problem is, because, sometimes when their business is kind of low, they may add on some additional hours of labor, which is really unnecessary because this is a really simple job. Anybody could really do this. So the most important thing when you're ordering your new carburetor is you want to ensure that you have the one that properly fits your model. So on the back of these mowers, there's a little tag on the back of the engine, and then I'll tell you what model engine you have, and therefore you can go online and just search carburetors for that specific engine, and then you just want to make sure when you're about to purchase it that carburetor does work with that specific engine. I'll insert a clip right now of what that tag looks like, and yeah, so pretty much the rest of this video is just going to be taking off this carburetor and replacing it, and I'm also going to throw in a new air filter in there, and then we'll see if she runs after that. So let's go. Off your air filter cover, which I've done. Next thing you need to do is take out your air filter, and just comparing these two real quick, you'll see how dirty it gets. And imagine having to breathe through this every time you took a breath. It'd be a lot easier to breathe in through this. So think of it that way. The cleaner this is, the better your engine will run. I haven't replaced this in the 2 or 3 years that we've had this mower, so it's definitely time to replace it. Probably a good idea to replace it at least once a year. So we'll discard that. Next thing you need to do is just take off the rest of this cover, which there are 2 bolts, which I've already removed. Then you just want to shift this to the side. And now you'll see that we have exposed our actual carburetor. So there's a little gasket right there, which the new carburetor that we got did come with new gaskets, so we don't have to worry about keeping those clean. So we'll throw them off to the side. Next thing I need to do, so I'm going to adjust the camera a little bit here. Alright, let's see. Next thing we got to do is start taking off these little push rods. And for this push rod, I like to take it off from the other side, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But as for right now, we can take off this second push rod. So hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. There's one little spring, so I just take a pair of needle nose and flip that up. And then the second push rod, you just got to pop it right off. You got to twist this to the side a little bit. And you'll understand once you go to take it off how easy it is to pop it off. So that's all done. Another thing that I can do right now is take off my fuel line. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to come down to this hose that goes into the carburetor right there. I'm going to take a pair of needle nose vice grips, and I'm just going to pinch off this line. You don't want it to go too tight, just enough to pinch off the flow of gas, which that's secure. I'm going to go and take my needle nose and try and take this clamp off. Now that's off, and I'm going to try and pop this hose right out. A little bit of gas may come out. That's not too bad. Now, some small gas engine maintenance people do recommend to replace this pipe every so often because it does deteriorate over time. Mine's in good condition right now, so I'm not going to really worry about replacing that. But also, if you did want to check if there's any obstructions in this line, now would be the opportune time to open up or release this clamp and just dump out a little bit of gas, collect it in a cup or an appropriate container. And that way you can just check your flow and make sure that everything's coming out normal. Alright, so the next thing I got to do is take off this second push rod, which this push rod is for an automatic choke feature. And the easiest way to get to that, I'd recommend, is taking off this top cover, which is held on by 3 bolts. That just pops off like so. Now you have better access to this push rod. Alright, so now that we've removed the top cover, we're going to have more room to remove this push rod. And again, this push rod is your automatic choke feature, and how it works is there's basically a little housing over here on top of the exhaust, which this is your exhaust muffler, I suppose. And as this engine heats up, there's a spring in here, and what that spring will do is it will expand and therefore shutting off the choke after the engine gets hot enough. So that's how that works. And to take this off, I'm just going to take my needle nose, give it a little twist, and it should come out. I had a lot of trouble taking it out the first time, but it will be easier to take off over time. And there's the push rod. I'm just going to leave that off to the side. And now we're actually ready to remove this carburetor, and it just slides out like so. Very easy and straightforward. Just be careful because there is still fuel at the bottom of this bowl, so I'm just going to try and keep this upright for now. And then you have your second gasket, and we'll take that off. Now before I go any further, I'm going to dump the gas out of this real quick, and we'll take a quick peek inside and see what it looks like. Okay, so I just drained the gas out of the bowl of this carburetor, and let's take a peek what we have inside. So as you can see, the top actually looks relatively clean, and that's because I just cleaned it out a couple days ago. But now if you look in the bottom of this bowl here, you can see that corrosion and sediment. Well, actually there's really not much sediment because I really cleaned it all out, but you can definitely see the corrosion that's going on in there. And now we'll do one even better. Now I'm going to take off this bobber right here, or float, and I believe the purpose of the float is when the bowl becomes full of fuel, it'll rise and it'll show off the fuel flow, and as the bowl empties of gas, this float's going to sink back down and allow more fuel to come back in the bowl. And how you remove that is there's just a little pin right here, and that just slides right out. You're ready to catch your bobber. Sorry, off camera a little bit here. That will just fall right out. And you can see there's definitely some corrosion going on in there. And again, I cleaned it out the best I could, but there was only so much I could do. And there's your needle, which tip actually doesn't look too bad, so we will keep this as a spare part, but this carburetor, I'm sure it's just caked up real good on the inside. So that's what the inside of a carburetor looks like. And now what I'm going to do is just take a clean shop towel, just clean this area out a little bit. You can use some type of cleaning agent if you'd like. However, I wouldn't recommend it too much because we will be putting a new gasket on there, and the cleaning agent may or may not dry out the gasket faster. So here's the new gasket that came with the kit. Put that on like so. Next, I'm just going to take a look at the carburetor, which I should have done earlier and just ensured that it looked the same as the other one. I'll actually compare it real quick. Which they do, in fact, look exactly the same. Sorry, my camera skills aren't the best today. And very important, you want to make sure that you put this on in the same orientation that you took it off. An easy way to tell is the fuel line comes in from this side, so that's going to go towards the fuel tank. Go. And now I'm going to put on the second new gasket. That's on there. That looks good. Now I'm going to put on the automatic choke push rod. In my opinion, it's a lot easier to put the automatic choke push rod on than it is to take it off. There we go, that's back on. I'm going to put this other spring, which I believe is your throttle, or maybe an automatic shutoff, something along those lines. That sinks right back in there. There's a little spring that goes on here. Move the camera over a little bit. So again, to put this rod back on, you twist this horizontally, and this rod, I'll take it out real quick. It just drops right in. You may need to apply a little force, and there's a small little spring on the bottom here that just gets secured back on there. Next thing you do, put your fuel line back in. Also, you want to inspect it for any cracks or anything that may be going on down there. Just my fuel line is in good condition. So I have that back on there. I'm going to move the clamp back over the inlet. It's good to go. Now I can unclamp the fuel line. That's good to go. Next thing I'm going to do is put back on the cover. And you just want to be careful when you're tightening this down, especially if you're using a impact gun like I am, because it's very easy to damage the plastic parts on this. So if you want to be safe, it would be a smart idea just to go ahead and hand tighten these. Want to make sure it just pops right back in there normally. Where is my gun? There it is. Just very gentle. Alright, that cover is back on there nice and tight. It actually looks a little bit off, which I think it's actually fine. Yeah, that's fine. Alright, so we have that cover back on there now. Now, the next thing we need to do is resecure the air filter housing. And just when you're putting this back on, I had this happen to me when I was taking apart the carburetor the other day. There are two steel bushings in here, so you just want to make sure that those bushings stay on there. If you see something that looks kind of like a small pipe pop out, they go right there, just so you're aware. And that's going to slide right back in there. Take our two nuts, put it back in there. By the way, if this is dirty, you definitely want to make sure you wipe it down nice and clean. Which mine's nice and clean right now because, again, a week ago when I had this part, made sure that this was nice and clean. Again, you want to do this not too tight. Tighten them down evenly. I'm going to switch over to hand ratchet. Just because you can feel out how tight putting it on better. You do want this one to be snug, because you want to make sure those gaskets seat properly. I like where that's at. Finally, you're going to put on your new air filter. That fits in there real nice. Make sure your cap's clean. Throw your cap back on. And that is how you replace a carburetor. So let's take this outside and see if she fires up.
Mower.
Job well done.